Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Juliet, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. Before I pass it over to Joe, our speaker, let me cover a few housekeeping items. At the top of your screen are multiple engagement tools you can use. All tools are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. You can expand your presentation area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner. If you have any audio or video issues, you can find answers to some common technical issues located in the Help widget at the top of your screen. Also, this webinar will be recorded and sent via the email you registered with. Lastly, if you have any questions during the presentation, you can submit them through the Q&A widget. We're here to answer you live via the chat, so don't hesitate to reach out throughout the presentation. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Today, we're joined by Dale Brown. Dale has acquired more than 43 years of expertise in embedded control of specialty equipment, mining, heavy construction, military, and rail vehicles throughout the US, Canada, South America, and Europe. Dale is a licensed professional engineer with extensive design, management, and business development experience. Dale is also leading related standards development efforts with NCOSE and APTA. We are also joined by Joe Gold, Senior Account Executive here at Jama Software. Joe brings a wealth of experience in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, with a particular focus on driving sales and building strong client relationships. Joe specializes in understanding client needs, delivering tailored solutions, and fostering long-term partnerships that drive success and innovation in the AEC sector. Lastly, we're joined by Patrick Garman, Manager of Solutions and Consulting at Jama Software. Has solutions lead for the AEC and industrial technology and consumer electronics industry. Patrick oversees product solutions and professional services and works with Jama Connect customers across the organization to optimize requirements management practices that help innovators to succeed. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Joe and Dale, to dive in.
All right, so I am really excited to welcome today Dale Brown. Dale spent his career helping complex industries, everything from high-tech manufacturing to large infrastructure, figure out how to deliver, large, risky programs without losing control of scope, intent, or accountability. What I appreciate about Dale is that he's not theoretical. He's a practitioner who's seen firsthand what happens when decisions, requirements, and changes aren't connected, and how powerful it is when they are. And today we're going to explore what systems engineering thinking really looks like, why AEC is already closer to it than we think, and what happens when that thinking is applied intentionally. Most people, Dale, on this call don't think of themselves as systems engineers. They're architects, they're engineers, they're contractors and owners. So let's begin really simple. In plain English, what is systems engineering really about?
Yeah, thanks, Joe, and thanks for inviting me to the conversation. Yeah, a lot of those folks probably really are doing systems thinking, or as we call it, systems engineering. But it doesn't have to be engineering. It's just using that systems view of the world. So I'll just try to explain it in a fairly using lay terms as opposed to a lot of tech speak. I mean, we live in a very complex world. In our daily lives, we're surrounded by a complicated environment. Our cars, our phones, our homes, our offices, schools, trains, and planes. And we ourselves are pretty complex creatures.
Mm-hmm.
And we're part of a community, usually which is part of a town or a city, which is part of a state, which is part of a region, part of a country, and part of the planet. So that's kind of the way all these parts sort of, you can see how they aggregate. And that's really what systems thinking is. It's thinking about, where do I fit into a bigger picture, potentially a bigger environment. So in the case of, like an infrastructure project, you would know that there are local codes of practice, national, state and national codes of, and maybe even international. So where do I fit into all that? And especially for the architects who are looking at, the bigger picture to see how does their design, what is the look and feel of what they're trying to accomplish, both internally to say it's a structure, or externally, if it's a cool new stadium or anything really.
Mm-hmm.
Does it fit maybe it's not intended to fit. Maybe it's intended to stand out. So all of those external things affect their system thinking. And that's really, that's it in a lay terms. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. It's a great perspective, Dale. Great way of thinking about it. So thank you for that. So let me ask you then, where do you already see systems engineering principles showing up in AEC, even if we don't call them that?
Yeah, and I mean the terminology is such a big thing, Joe. But yeah, I see it all the time because you'll get, civil engineers that know they have to think outside of their particular part. And if we think, that again, using the word systems and defining what is it, it's a collection of parts. Or,
Hmm.
the more formal definition is, a group of elements that form a system. But if you think
Hmm.
of it just in, parts. What's their part in it? What is it that they're designing? And so they're already understanding, okay, they probably, if it's the foundation person, they probably got to talk to the soils engineer. And at some point, the civil and electrical guys have to talk, or the conduits are going to be put in the wrong place in the concrete. And that sort of thing. They're already thinking about the system, even if it's just the aesthetics, the look and feel. So they're doing this, and they have been doing it for, well, I guess 6 or 7 thousand years. So it's not new. But I think what's new and what's kind of crept up is new terminology related to aerospace, and actually software has been the big push.
Sure. No, that's great, Dale. I'm hearing systems engineering more and more inside AEC firms. We have some large construction companies that we work with that are using, systems engineering practices, for lack of a better term. Let me ask you then, so what are the most critical issues then facing AEC companies today from, say, a delivery and risk perspective?
Yeah, what I've seen
Hmm.
on a lot of big, multi-billion-dollar projects is it's at some point you have to provide a defensible audit trail of all the decisions, not all, but the critical decisions you've made.
Hmm.
And especially if it's a change order or something, like why did you make that change? How is it documented? And where can I see, that evolution of things in the design and then ultimately in the actual build? Uh,
Hmm.
and if you can't show that to either state safety oversight or a local building inspector or the client, you'll probably not get permission to occupy and use the facility for revenue service, which is just means that from that point forward, all you're doing is damage control. You're burning cash. You're sadly probably also burning reputation, both of the owner, especially if it's public money, and
Hmm.
the state authority, whoever's involved in it. So that's the big risk, is that you build this thing and you either can't use it because you've made some sort of an error partway through, or you're not allowed to use it, which is almost kind of worse because you're there, but you can't
Right.
you can't provide that assurance.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you definitely answered my question. Is like, what happens when you can't answer those questions? It sounds like it's pure damage control is what it is. And I think
Yeah.
you nailed it, Dale. Can you talk about the financial and organizational impact of this lack of, and I'll use the word traceability. And if you could just kind of quickly define what traceability might mean, I think I know what it means, but I'll ask the expert. What impact, does that have financially and organizationally?
Yeah, so again, traceability is one of those terms that have become quite popular
Mhm.
throughout aerospace and software, design and development. And really, what it means, it's a defensible audit trail showing
Mhm.
that this part must do the following things in the following ways in a certain environment. So you have to be able to show the relationship between all of those, we call them, requirements.
Mhm.
They can just be needs, but whatever terminology you want to use, you have to show that it's linked in it, and it has to be a repeatable thing. It has to be something that you can consistently show the linkage to, and
Yeah.
that's how we refer to, traceability. Also, to, if you're doing tests, like you've built it or you've partially built it, and you need to show evidence that you've actually designed and built it, to whatever requirements or codes of practice that are, needed, then you need to show again that defensible linkage, and it has to be done consistently. So that to me is a kind of a long definition of traceability, but hopefully it works.
Yeah, no, that definitely works. The impact of change, obviously, in the world of AEC, it's not a if it's going to change, it's when it's going to
Yeah,
change, and
yeah.
having that, again, for lack of a better term, traceability or defensible audit trail, whatever we want to call it, is just absolutely huge. And really, when we look at project management tools, I feel like they're great for managing a project. Use many of them across the board. But when you need to get granular on something and we need to understand impacts and decisions and have that audit trail like you spoke of, I mean, that's just gold. And financially not having it can just have a huge impact on the profit margin of that project. So thanks for that, Dale. So have we seen, I mean, I can speak to this, but have we seen real projects go sideways because of a lack of traceability?
Yes. Often, the old adage is that systems fail at interfaces, and if you don't understand, where something is connecting to something else, basically an interface,
Hmm.
then that's probably going to fail. And it can be as simple as, the control rack doesn't fit in the room,
Hmm.
or the air conditioning that was designed for the room, the person designing the HVAC unit didn't realize what the heat load was from that rack of electronics. And so there's an example. Another more common one that I see, sadly, in almost every project is the conduits were buried in the concrete in the wrong location, or they were the wrong size, or an assumption was made that you could mix the high voltage or even medium voltage with low level signals. So those are examples of what happens, and some of those can get pretty expensive because the concrete's still green and already you're breaking out the jackhammers.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a huge impact on projects. And so thank you for that. Let me ask you this. If systems engineering or traceability is so valuable, then why has AEC been so slow to adopt
Mhm.
these practices? I don't understand.
Yeah, it's been a it's been a frustration and a passion of mine for a couple of decades now, almost seems like 15 years anyway. And
Hmm.
what's happened is I think, the a lot of it is the words matter discussion we had earlier, where if you present it the wrong way and try to deploy it as if, building a new train station or a new skyscraper or anything
Hmm.
is the same as writing software. So if you use all the code terminology and try to ram that down the throats of people that have, got, as I said earlier, thousands, if not hundreds of years of expertise backing up their education.
Hmm.
Um, and they're used to doing things a certain way and having a certain terminology guide them. They may not refer to requirements, or maybe in their mind, requirements means contract requirements only, and it's not the same as a formal technical requirement. Those sorts of misunderstandings in words. But when you start throwing so much new terminology and you force them, and you say you must do things this way, you have to get all the system requirements first. And the civil guy or maybe the architect on the project saying, "What do you mean? What are these words?" And they may or may not be familiar with it, depending on their age and their experience. And if you're not communicating to them that you're really just looking for, well, what are the user needs? What are the local codes of practice? What's the basis of design? What are
Hmm.
going to be the exceptions to the code? And maybe those are the ones that we have to really focus on, because the rest of the stuff is already covered through normal building practices. So now we're kind of getting into a point of sort of a side discussion, but really important one on efficiency. So what's happened is the industry has seen a lot of bureaucracy foisted on them
Hmm.
through some words in a contract document that says you shall incorporate ISO 15288 systems engineering. and they're not familiar with it or the terms in a lot of cases. That's changing slowly, but it's also if you can't apply it directly out of the software world into the AEC world. It just doesn't make sense. You have to tailor it. You have to make it make sense. So if
Mhm.
you end up with making them do work twice, which is what happens in a lot of cases where they've already done a basis of design document, but now they have to deal with requirements in a separate requirements document or tool that was very expensive, and they don't understand how to use the tool, and it's been prescribed to them in the contract. Sometimes they even put the tool in the contract, and it gets very frustrating. So there's been a bad history of this over the past 15 years anyway. And we're trying to turn the corner on that and really address, maybe it's just the exceptions to code that we really need to show extremely good traceability, extremely good audit trail evidence. We don't have to show every single nuance of every single design because it's just normal practice. It's going to be checked, through and accepted through local building codes anyway. So let's not do it 2 and 3 times. And I think that's the distaste and it's created the resistance, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think you nailed it too. Change is hard.
Yeah,
And if
yeah,
something's working, even if you're just being reactive and going from fire drill to fire drill, why change? You already have a system in place. And so I think that addressing that change is hard, first and foremost, is a big thing. But understanding the value of what you're going to get out of the systems engineering practice, I think, is something that we need to do a great job in AEC of promoting.
yeah.
I got one last question, Dale. It's a loaded one. So, if AEC leaders, take away one idea from this conversation, just one, what should it be?
I would say that systems thinking across the whole life cycle of the project gives you a really good way to mitigate your risk. And it's really just a conversation sort of that's enforced somewhat or facilitated is maybe a better word by the system thinkers, and that could be the architect on the project, or it could be any one of the discipline engineers, whoever takes the reins and says, "I want to make sure that all the stakeholders on this are talking to each other, and I want
Mhm.
to understand that when a change is made, how does that ripple through? If you can just get that sort of idea of risk mitigation through better communication between disciplines, boy, that would be the thing that heads off a lot of problems."
Yeah, that definitely would be the thing. So, Dale, we're running out of time, but I wanted to thank you. This was absolutely incredibly grounding, a bit eye-opening for how much risk and rework in AEC really comes down to lost intent and really disconnected decisions. So appreciate you sharing the systems engineering lens and making it feel more practical, not theoretical. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Patrick to connect this thinking on how teams are starting to apply in real AEC projects. So Patrick, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Joe, and thank you also to Dale for joining us today. That was a really valuable and good conversation. Now I want to introduce to you the Jama Connect solution for AECO industry. So here I have an example project space, and let's just get oriented to this project space. On the left side, we have the project explorer tree, and this is how we are going to organize all of our project or program engineering data. So as you can see, it has a hierarchical structure so that everything has its own place. This makes it very easy to find information and quickly pull together any data that you might need. Here on the right, we have one of our dashboards for the project setup. So here, for example, I can quickly see the current status of all of my owner requirements for this project. How many have been reviewed, how many are currently being reworked, and how many are approved in their current form. And these dashboard widgets are fully interactive, so as you see as I hover over different sections, it highlights that information, but also I can click through a different section to see a filtered list of those exact requirements. Another dashboard element I want to point out here is our traceability information model. So this is a set of rules that dictate for this project what requirements can be related to one another. Think of it as, the rules of the road for traceability, like what Joe and Dale were talking about. So what can relate to what, and also what does good coverage mean for this project? These rules provide guardrails for that defensible audit trail. And because Jama Connect understands this model, it can automatically alert you to gaps in coverage and also flag items that might need to be re-reviewed when upstream changes happen. So let's zoom out now. Let's take a look at importing an owner's requirement document directly from Word. So Jama Connect uses the heading styles in a Word document to parse structure. So sections and subsections become a hierarchy, and we can manage this content as real traceable items instead of static text. So I just tell Jama which file to import, give a little bit of guidance on how to interpret that document. Jama gives us a quick preview, and when I submit, Jama Connect actually breaks down this document into atomic requirements that we can create discrete connections with other requirements to then create that defensible audit trail that Dale mentioned. Once the document is imported, you can see that Jama preserved the structural hierarchy of the document in the Explorer tree. Now I can view these requirements individually, or by clicking on the set, I can view these requirements together in context. And while I have Document View open, I want to show you how Jama Connect Advisor can help with the post-import review of these requirements. Jama Connect Advisor is an add-on suite of AI tools for Jama Connect that serve as a co-pilot to your product engineers to accelerate development. I'm going to use the Jama Connect batch analysis tool to review the requirements I just imported against best practices for quality requirements. Jama Connect Advisor is going to flag things like ambiguity, unclear actors, or compound requirements. The goal here isn't perfect writing. It's finding requirements that can be reviewed, implemented, tested, and defended. So I love this tool. I think of it as kind of a spell check for requirements. I can easily navigate between the different requirements in this panel, and for each Jama Connect Advisor is showing me exactly where a particular requirement is deviating from those best practices. But Jama Connect Advisor is not only flagging where there might be issues, it can also be used to refine requirements against industry standards. So as you can see, Jama Connect Advisor in this case also identified that this requirement should really be further parsed into individual statements. And now, with just a few clicks of a mouse, I can add these as sub-requirements or children of the source requirement. This way, I don't lose track of where each of these actually came from. And with all things Jama Connect, our AI tools also create an audit trail so that you can easily identify which requirements were generated using Jama Connect Advisor. Once we've validated all of these owner requirements post-import and run our refinement, it's now time to route these requirements into a structured review with our discipline leads. So discipline leads, electrical, mechanical, IT, safety, will be able to tag and comment directly in the system with decisions captured in an audit-ready record. Now, in fact, I actually already have an in-progress review that we can look at. So Jama Connect's Review Center is designed to solicit and collect feedback from stakeholders. And I am participating in this particular review as an approver, which means that I am asked to provide feedback on these requirements and also to mark each as either approved if it needs no further action or rejected if I feel that it needs rework or additional refinement. When I do find a requirement that needs refinement, I can very quickly and easily add comments directly tagged to text to provide additional context, and even tag other review participants to get their feedback. Now then, using Jama Connect's Review Center is ideal for creating a single source of truth. All feedback and commentary on requirements is saved in the tool alongside the requirements, so you can feel confident that all stakeholder feedback is being addressed. And since the review center is separate from the project space, you have total control over what information review participants can view. So you can even include external stakeholders in these reviews. Now then, I'm going to take a little shortcut to mark this full page as approved. And you can see that when an approver finishes approving all requirements, they will have the option to complete their portion of the review. And since I've approved all of those requirements, I can actually use my Jama Connect user credentials to apply an audit-ready signature to my approval. Now let's take a look at a project that's a bit more mature in terms of traceability. So if we go back to our project space, I can use this change project to find this other project. And here we've already decomposed and allocated owner's requirements into project management requirements and system level requirements organized by discipline. And in this project, I can use a feature called Live Trace Explorer to evaluate the coverage or traceability. So this gives me a 10,000 foot view at the trace health of my project, and I am seeing a lot of red here. But this is Live Trace Explorer. It's an interactive map of trace relationships. You can start at a system requirement and see what's downstream. Do I have the design requirements and system architecture? Where am I with test coverage? So as you can see, Jama is calculating a % of how many of my top level requirements have been decomposed according to the rules set for my project. And in fact, on each of these, I can click through to a particular relationship pairing to open in Trace View, which gives me a much more granular view or more detailed view of the relationships. This is showing me the specific relationships between owner level requirements or stakeholder requirements, and in this case, my project management requirements. And you can see that Jama Connect is highlighting where I am missing coverage, and I can take action directly from this view to add a related item or create new relationships. So you can start to see how traceability is key to building a defensible audit trail. These relationships between requirements show how and why design decisions were made through the decomposition and allocation trail, and also enable better impact analysis so that you can respond to change orders with confidence. With our impact analysis feature, I can select an owner's requirement that is part of a change order, and with a few clicks, get a full readout of all other requirements that might be impacted. This means that you can more accurately scope a change order and determine the real impacts, minimizing surprises down the line and preserve your project budget. But traceability doesn't stop here. Another component of our audit trail is showing the evidence that we have constructed what we set out to construct. And this is typically in the form of evidence documents received by inspectors or subcontractors, and these can easily be imported to Jama Connect in the same way that we imported that initial owner's requirement document. Now, and you'll see though, when we import the evidence record, they're not actually related to any requirements. But this is a great opportunity for me to show you another tool that is available through our Jama Connect Advisor product. So instead of manually hunting for what this evidence supports, we can use our relationship discovery tool, again through Jama Connect Advisor, to let Jama semantically match the evidence to the requirements that it fulfills. So I select recommend requirements to relate, and in this case I know I'm actually only looking for system requirements, so I can narrow the search to just that item type. And when I click recommend items, Jama Connect Advisor will get to work, again, evaluating the content of each piece of evidence that was parsed on import and finding system level requirements that look like they align to each. When the relationship discovery engine has completed, you can show recommended items, see previews of each, and select the specific requirements that you want to relate to this piece of evidence. So, with Jama Connect Advisors Relationship Discovery, we're taking a task that would normally take hours upon hours for a team to manually review and match evidence documents to the requirements, and we are streamlining it with just a few clicks of a mouse. And here's the payoff. You get a trace matrix that shows your end-to-end coverage from owner's needs to system requirements to verification and evidence. This is what readiness looks like. Coverage, gaps, and change impact all visible in one place. So here we've seen how to import requirements, refine them, review them by discipline, connect evidence, and generate end-to-end trace coverage with change impact and gaps made visible automatically. If you want more information about how to implement this solution, please reach out to your account executive or your customer success manager to learn more. And with that, thank you so much for your attendance.
Yes, thanks all for joining us. We will be sharing the recording of this webinar in a follow-up email after it has concluded. Take care, everyone. Thanks again.